I typically see problems on final exams like this. And there's a typical mistake that's made. Okay? And the typical mistake that's made is done in the first step. So here's the first step. The first step is to factor out b. Because does this match the form I gave to you today? Not quite. So your first step is for you to match those equations that we received at the beginning of class. And to do that, we need to take out that 2. That leaves us with x. Here's the mistake. Here's the place. Is it minus pi? It's minus pi halves. It is very, very, very common on a problem like this to do the wrong phase shift. The wrong phase shift is the most common error because frequently people will say, oh, the phase shift is to the right pi. Good job going to the right, but it's not pi, it's pi halves. And so that makes a big deal, especially if it's a multiple choice problem and you're trying to choose the one that matches and there's one of each. And it's all or nothing because of that one little phase shift. Though I'm pretty sure the trig test, the trig final is no longer multiple choice at all. So maybe that makes it better. Okay, so let's find all the things listed. Let's find amplitude. Amplitude is what? Amplitude is what? 3. What if you gave an answer -3? You would be wrong. Okay, what's the period? Okay, no, 2 is the number that we use to find the period. But 2 itself is not the period. 2 is the number of cycles that happen in 2 pi. So we have a formula to find the period. 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi. This stuff isn't that hard, but it's really easy to make mistakes with it if you're not careful. Okay, frequency is the same thing we just talked about earlier, which would just be 1 over pi, correct? And I don't think they ask you that on every problem. I'm pretty sure there are some questions on frequency, but that's not going to be on every problem. So, anyway. Okay. Then I need to do phase shift. Of course, that's the one that's most commonly learned or missed on this problem like this. Phase shift is sometimes abbreviated PS. So phase shift is what? The positive pi halves would be a good way of describing that, because if it's positive, that means we're moving it to the right. Whereas if this had been a plus, then how would we describe the phase shift? Negative pi halves, because that tells us we're moving it to the left. So instead of having to say pi halves right or pi halves left, you would do pi halves for right and negative pi halves for left. So you just do the opposite of that number. But you make sure you've factored out that number of cycles, number first, right? Okay, so now let's graph this thing. Ugh. Alright, because the period is pi, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit so I have more room to see what I'm doing. So you'll notice on one side of your graph paper, I gave you graphs that are stretched out differently, just in case you want to do something different. Like notice how this graph goes clear up to 4 pi, so that would be good for one that has a half in it that's stretched out. Or this one here is broken into pi 6. This graph is a good one to use if your phase shift is a pi thirds or pi 6, because those are a little bit harder to do. Anyway, oh, and look at this graph I gave to you. That one goes up to pi, so that would be easier for one like this problem, right? Where the period is pi, so it's easier to see what's happening because you stretch it out a little. So I just decided to throw this together with a whole bunch of different units of graphs just so you could use it to help you with your graphing. I don't know which graphs would fit to what problems. That's up to you. So if you want to actually use this to do your homework, yeah, I can make more of this if you'd like, or you can just adapt to it, or I can just put it online and you can print it out as you need it, or whatever. Okay? Alright, let's do this. So this problem, do we want to just start with our original graph? How tall are we going to have to go for this one? 3, because the amplitude is 3, correct? So I just want to start with my basic sine graph first, just for fun, just really light. There's my sine graph. This is where you really, really might like to use colored pencils, in which case I have a bunch, so if you want to, no problem. Hand them out. Okay. The next step I'm going to do is the amplitude, but also, even though the amplitude's only is 3, we have to remember something else. It's common to forget, you might be so focused on remembering that the amplitude is 3 and not -3 and making sure you list that correctly that you actually forget to flip it. So be careful. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and do the amplitude change right now. So I'm going to do this graph right here that does those two things. So flipped and amplitude 3. Okay? Now the next thing I need to deal with is changing the... I don't think we do the phase shift until very last. I think we want to do this first, where we actually squish it first. So, and then let's talk about graphing these on your calculator. We should have done that last time, I just realized that. Okay. So then, because of this 2, so because the period's actually pi, that's going to change this to being half the length. And I didn't do that extremely accurately. That's supposed to be going through pi halves right there. It's kind of skewed. There, that's maybe a little better. Okay, so there's the change in the period. Then, for our final answer, we do the phase shift to the pi halves, to the right, pi halves, correct? So that means this point here is going to move right to that point here. This point here is going to move right over here. Right? Oh wait, this one's in between. This one's like pi fourths in between, isn't it? So I put that the wrong place. I knew something was wrong. Okay, so that minimum goes to that point there because we're moving it over pi halves. And then this point moves to there. And this point will move to there. And this point will move to there. And this point moves to there. Do you see why putting this one more thing in here just makes these confusing? I don't know why they confuse me so much. They shouldn't. Okay. So down, up, back to middle. Down, up, back to middle. So there's 2 cycles of the graph. And it's the red one that's my final answer. Then, what if you're supposed to list the 5 key points? What would that be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those points right there. So this one here would be pi halves, comma 0. This one here would be what? 3 pi fourths, comma -3. This point here would be pi, comma 0. This point here would be 7 pi fourths, comma 3. And this point here would be 3 pi halves? 3 pi halves comma 0. So there's my 5 key points. That tells me I know I've put the graph exactly where I want it to be. So see, I was all good with this until I add one more thing, and then my brain just starts going, did I do that right? I don't know, then I start just questioning myself. I don't know why I don't have more confidence with graphing.